chaotic week. So to stop and sit with Sangha is always refreshing. Indulge me, I have to scroll. I need to see faces just for a moment. Ah, look at you all. Thank you. And so nice to see some older faces, and I don't mean by age, but I mean old friends of mine, and some new faces as well. So a special welcome to you if you're joining us relatively newly, or a special welcome even if you've been here hundreds of times and I've never seen you before. So it's just very nice to be together. So my name is Joan, and I work as a nurse, and my past talks, or my most recent past talks, have been a lot about nursing and the practice of nursing. But I used to dance. I was a dancer 1,000 kalpa ago. I danced professionally. And I've been thinking lately how similar our practice of zazen and dance are. They're a practice that requires a fair amount of discipline, of coming back again and again and again to this moment. And there are days where, you know, triple pirouettes come with ease. And there are days that we don't have a leg to stand on. And yet we come back again and again and again. So we come back for a few reasons, you know, so to get ready for the performance. You know, the cushion is the practice. It's the mind gym, if you will, so that we can get up and we can have a seamless practice in the world, so that we can be in the world with our friends, our coworkers, patients, clients, and we can be present. So we go to the mind gym regularly, and it takes practice. You know, Misty Copeland didn't just walk out on stage and be Odette. She continues likely to take class every day and go to Pilates and yoga and train, you know, very, very hard, so that she can make that transformation. But with so many things, you know, arising, you know, in our own minds and outside of our minds, outside of our small self, it can be difficult to have seamless practice. It can be a real challenge. And yet maybe, you know, those challenges are really the medium that is best to practice in. So in the Denko Roku, which is a collection of koans that relate sort of the enlightenment or transmission stories of all our ancestors, well, I shouldn't say all of our ancestors, of our male ancestors, from Bodhidharma, or I'm sorry, from Shakyamuni Buddha, all the way through to Dogen and Koan Ejo. And they're small stories of their enlightenments. And there's one, or there's a few that come in a series after Bodhidharma's transmission to Weiki, although that story is actually not the classic that we know all so well, which I will relate, but there's a few in a row that are all very similar, and they've been resonant for me of late. So the classic story of Bodhidharma and Weiki, most of you likely know. Weiki came to him and said, I cannot settle my mind. You know, please, Master, I implore you, help me to settle my mind. And Bodhidharma said, bring me your mind and I'll settle it for you. And Weiki said, I've looked everywhere and I can't find it. And Bodhidharma said, well, there, I've settled it for you. And so while that's not the koan in the Denko Roku, the enlightenment story in the Denko Roku, it's the one we know well between Bodhidharma and Weiki. And then Weiki's disciple was Qianchi Sengsan, and he had a very similar enlightenment story. He said, I'm riddled with leprosy because of my wrongdoing. Please, Master, cure me, you know, heal me of my wrongdoing. And so he said, well, you know, bring me, show me your wrongdoing and I'll heal you of it. I've looked everywhere for it and I can't find it. Well, there, you're healed. And then the next one in the line of transmission is his student Daoxin. And Daoxin says, I'm looking for supreme liberation. Please offer me the teaching of supreme liberation. And Daoxin says, or I'm sorry, Sengsan says to Daoxin, well, what's binding you? Who's binding you? And he said, well, I've looked everywhere and there's no one binding me. He said, then why are you seeking liberation? And with that, he was greatly liberated. And I love these stories. I absolutely love them. You know, they're core teachings in the Zen tradition. They're the teachings of shunyata, of absolute emptiness. They bring us back to, you know, what is this that you think is outside of this moment? And, you know, they're the construct dismantlers. They're the things that maybe brought many of us to Zen practice. You know, we love them. But I have a concern around them too. I have a concern that they can be seen as the final stop on the train, that they're the ultimate teaching, and it allows for what might be seen as eyes rolled back in the head kind of practice, a blissed out practice that makes room for maybe unethical teaching, or, you know, unethical teachers, unethical practice, and it's ignored because we take it as, you know, we're all one, man. It's all good. And yet I think there's more work there than just that. You know, even in the Zen Peacemakers order, I'm not suggesting that any one of us do this or any of the Zen Peacemaker teachers do that, but we can see, you know, oh, I'm bearing witness, and that's enough, you know, to just, I'm bearing witness. And so I see you, and I'm gonna stop with, I see you. But I don't think I see you is enough. I think there needs to be a little bit more. So I found this quote, and I'm going to apologize. I don't remember where I found it, but it keeps kind of popping up for me. So I'm going to just read it. Since a person most fundamentally is to be understood as a selfless, dependently arisen confluence of 5 aggregates, processing transient phenomena through 6 sense doors in a moment-to-moment construction of virtual experience, the matters of skin color, race, social status, and even gender are of relatively little consequence. And, you know, as I said earlier, I love that. I absolutely love that. But I think we're also wise to remember something Nagarjuna is credited with saying: emptiness wrongly grasped is like picking up a snake from the wrong end. It can bite us. So I'm struck by this idea. I love the idea that all is one, you know, that simply that delusion can be, you know, assuaged, and we can wake up to universality, to interpenetrating, interdigitating oneness of all phenomena. I think it's fantastic. And yet things are also oppressive and exclusory and can cause us real pain and real disease. We might, as Frederick Douglass, Frederick Douglass shared in his July 4th speech, and I'm sure many of you have seen the video of his ancestors, his great, 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 and great, 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 great grandchildren reciting this speech that he gave. And in it he says, the liberties you may feel today are not felt in common. So while we're all one, the liberties that some feel today are not felt in common. And as Zen students, we've likely had an experience, you know, that momentary glimpse, you know, where the light is you know, goes off, and we have that moment on the cushion, or maybe, you know, in the most benign of places where we go, ah, connected, not separate. But does that relieve or remove systemic racism? Does that cure it? Does that fix it? I think it's really strong medicine. I think zazen is incredibly strong medicine, but I don't think it's enough to cure this disease. So hearing the teachings of bring me your mind, bring me your wrongdoing, who binds you, it's like getting a prescription. The doctor's handed you something, but we have to take that prescription to the pharmacy. And then we've got to pick the medication up, and we've got to put it in our mouth, and we've got to swallow it. And if you're like me, it's not a pill that's, you know, a one-time thing. Oh, if it were. But it's not. I have to take that medication every single day. And it's slow release. And it's much like an antibiotic. I think if I stopped taking it, I might become resistant to it. You know, so I need to take it every single day. So these, you know, and what happens if I don't take it every day? You know, I think what happens that not taking it every day, you know, is all lives matter. It's I don't see race. It's I'm colorblind. I think that might be what getting the prescription, but not taking the medicine looks like. So they're lovely ideas, and I wish they were true. I wish those ideas were true, that all lives matter. And of course they do, but it's not the full reality. The full reality is I'm a racist. I'm a racist because I'm a white man that was born and raised in this country. I was indoctrinated into this culture, and I am, I am that. While I don't carry a KKK card, I'm not part of any neo-Nazi organization. I'm not separate from that. I was taught a history that was wiped clean of the atrocities acted out on the indigenous people that my ancestors came to their land and took over. And so I was allowed over those generations, my family was allowed over those generations to accumulate wealth and pass it down through generations, albeit not a lot, but they did that. And I benefit because of that. And that was done on the backs, largely, I would argue, of Black and brown people. So to ignore that, or to just roll my eyes back in my head and say, yeah, man, I'm one with everything, is just such a small, small part of that. So my recognition of no separation doesn't erase it. It's only the prescription. To address it, to address my implicit bias, I need to swallow that pill. I need to acknowledge what in Japanese is called hosan zanmai, that all things are interpenetrating, but not just in that base level of yeah, but really look at it, really look at that suffering, really look at that story and educate myself about it, what I don't know, because the indoctrination I received didn't teach me it. So my father, when we were growing up, shared with us with some pride, our heritage. So I am related to John Quincy Adams and John Adams. And more importantly, my father would count out all the greats on our fingers to someone you've never heard of, but he was Deacon Larkin. And Deacon Larkin was a horseler who kept horses. And so Paul Revere needed a horse. And he ran to him at night and asked my great grandfather, can I borrow your horse? Because the British are coming. So I was made to believe that this country was, not going to exist really, because, without my ancestors, that it didn't exist. We were crucial in that. And I don't think my father said that with a white people are better than Black people tone. I don't think that was his feeling, and yet he didn't have to say that, because that was just made clear. It was just a known that was implicitly taught, that's kind of how it was in my all white or predominantly white upbringing. So I can't help but think, of the experiment. I'm sure you've seen it, where children are given two baby dolls. One is Black and one is white. And they were given to Black children and they were given to white children. And choose one, that you think is the better doll. And overwhelmingly, the children chose the lighter skinned doll. Black or white children, it didn't matter. They overwhelmingly chose that doll. So that teaching goes across all colors in our country. We've all been taught that this is, the way things are, and it's deeply, deeply rooted. So I imagine African-American parents, look at a child who expresses that and says, no, look, there's more here. We're this skin tone, we have melanin, and babies with melanin are beautiful, and maybe in a white family, it looks a little bit more like, Spencer Tracy and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Until it's on your table, you're not going to think about it per se. We can just ignore it. But I think that the case is no longer. We can't ignore that. We have to look at this. So there's a koan that follows these koans in the Denko Roku, and it's of the enlightenment story of Daman Hongren. And the story is a little little complex. So he, it starts with him being an older man who hunts down his teacher and says, please, please, you know, I'm eager to receive the Dharma. I'm eager to receive the teaching. And he, in a very ageist way, dismisses him and says, you're too old for this. You know, I can't teach you. And what use would it be, because you can't really pass it on to anyone because you're too old, and dismisses him. So he goes down to the river and he sees a young girl. Long story short, he impregnates this young girl, and this girl's offspring, she's sent away, you know, by her parents because she's pregnant, and she delivers the reincarnated Hungrun. And so he finally meets up with his teacher again, a second time, and they're on the road going towards his hometown. And his teacher looks at him and notices that his bone structure is a little different. Maybe he's a different ethnicity, you know, maybe dad was from somewhere else. Maybe he's not Chinese at all. But in the commentary, or in the circumstances, as it's written in the Denko Roku, it relates that he notices his bone structure is different. And because of this, he asks him, what's your name? What's your surname? What's your family name? And in Chinese, the character is Jing. So he says, what's your Jing? And he says, well, I have a Jing. I have a nature, same character, Jing, but it's not a common name. And so he says, well, what is it called? And he says, it's Buddha nature. And so with that, he says, well, he presses him more. He says, so you still don't have a name? And he says, as Buddha nature is empty, I cannot have a name. And with that, he receives the transmission. But, you know, I found it interesting, you know, that he had to point out this bone structure to ask him his name. You know, I'm not a Buddhist scholar. I don't pretend to be at all. And I'm quite sure if Griff Folk was here and we had his translation, maybe some of this would be made clear. But I couldn't help but find it interesting, you know, that was the question that was asked. And maybe it was just the markings of Buddha that he was noticing, you know, that we talk about, that were the cheekbones, but maybe there was something else. And that aside, in the Denko Roku, I find it very interesting that every case begins with the 33rd ancestor, the 4th Chinese ancestor. It puts in parentheses. So it smells a little of like discovering America. You know, that the Zen, you know, we're going to start with number 1 where we are. And it goes on to sort of expound, you know, that all is one, and that there's no difference between the Japanese and there's no difference between the Chinese. And yet we're going to start again at number 1. So, you know, it begs questions as to how deep the roots of bias go, you know, that we maybe don't even see. So, I know when I look at my own heritage, when I'm looking at my own sort of background, there's aspects that I want to embrace, and there's aspects that I feel should be pushed away. So my queerness, I embrace fully. I think of my queer ancestors, and I align myself with that. And that can align me with others that are marginalized, for better or worse. You know, I may not know their story entirely, but I feel akin to it. There's parts of my Irish heritage that I feel, you know, pulls me closer to others' experiences. And then there's my, you know, sort of DAR background, you know, daughter of the American Revolution, that I want to push to the side. Or when I bring it up, I want to make sure that people know that John Adams and John Quincy Adams weren't slave owners. They didn't own slaves. There has to be a caveat, you know, something that is attached to it, that's extra. So that reflex, you know, to make what is outside myself separate, you know, is a spiritual bypass. And that impulse to align my experience with someone else's experience and say, we are one, is a spiritual bypass. So I think the medication has to be taken. That's the only way around it. You got to do the work. And zazen is an incredible, incredible medication. It's amazing. But like many meds today, we're finding that they work better when boosted with another medication. So I think perhaps boosting our zazen with real deep exploration of our intrinsic biases, where are they? Where do we get stuck? There's a lot online to look at, I'm not here to do that, but, I encourage you and myself, really look at the places we stick, and I think it's a good adjunct to our medicine of zazen. So the real and lasting change that I see coming is not going to be easy. I don't think it will happen easily. We can see contrapture, we can see the pulling back, we can see that impulse to make things great again. And the medication likely will not taste good. And I imagine there's going to be many uncomfortable moments and difficult conversations and anger and unrest. But through it all, we have this practice. We have the practice of zazen, of coming back again and again to this moment. And when we do that, we can see that our mind is settled, that we have nothing to be, nothing that binds us, and that we are absolutely free from disease. So with that, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite queer poets, Audre Lorde, and a poem that she had written. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Nedics, the women rally before the march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first, and the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations. I'm going to read it one more time. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Nedics, the women rally before the march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first, and the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations.